I want to now talk about the Sfirot. I have thoughts prepared, but sometimes the thoughts I prepare take flight and other thoughts intrude. First of all, my meditation on Chesed has stayed with me, and here's one reason. I didn't want to write it in my Shabbat thought because it's actually uh, 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 a little too personal to put in writing, and also um, I think it's maybe a stretch for you to believe me. Um, After October 7th, um, Mirav and I felt we had to be here. And part of it was because the Nova Festival were young people the age of our daughters. Most of you know that our daughter Shulamit actually had tickets to Nova Festival. She was going to go to the festival where the site of the Hamas massacre. She was in Canada, and instead of going to the festival, she came down to see us because October 7th is Mirav's birthday. And we still see that as a day of tragedy and a day of a miracle. But we just had this sense of all these wonderful young people that we know, and sometimes saw us as a in loco parentis, because they're here alone and they don't have parents, so we would gladly play that role now and then. We just wanted to come here and parent their friends who didn't have parents living in the country. And this a strong feeling we want to protect everybody. We just need to be here, that everybody here is in danger, and we are. I mean, when you remember the Iranian ballistic missile, I mean, hundreds of ballistic missiles were being shot at Israel, a clear attempt to commit, mass murder. And the fact that we were here during this time and we shared this experience, we could talk to people about it. So here's my odd experience. Because I came here, we came here, and again, I don't want this to sound too pretentious, but it's real. We came here ready to die. We came here ready to talk to people. We wanted to experience the fate of Israelis. And something strange happened. I look at every person when I walk down the street. I look and I think they would have killed you. 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 And I sense myself as, and I would protect you, and I would protect you, and I would protect you. So that feeling of we would protect them morphed into a feeling of love. Meaning, if I will die for you, I must love you in some kind of general agape way. And I know it did something to me that I would, we would be near the vegetable grocer in different places. May Rob and I walk in, and we kind of pour out good cheer and affection to people. And again, that's probably not the typical state of mind of most Israelis when they walk around. But people say to us it's noticeable when we go to get a driver's license and national insurance. We walk in, we sit down, and we look at people, and we're just happy. They say, "What are you so happy about?" We say, "We're happy to be here." Number one. So this state of chesed that we've had, it changes your experience. Now, we didn't expect it. We came here, as it were, to be present and to serve. But the feeling of chesed just began to emerge, and it really changes our emotional state. We wake up every day so glad to be here. So as I thought about it, now and then when I've counseled people and they're having trouble, they're in the four C's and the bad Jedi, and they're arguing and so forth. And, I'm helping with the techniques and getting things right. I said, and now I want to imagine there's a flow of chesed. There's a fountain within you. And you don't let the fountain flow because you're resentful, because you've been wounded, because it's not fair. There's no reciprocity. Someone's not meeting your expectations. So there's all these blockages to the fountain of chesed. And you say to yourself, well, can we draw boundaries and still have chesed? Can we be disappointed and still have chesed? Can things not be fair with someone in our family, and can we still have chesed? And I began to think that the Yetzer Hara plays a trick on us and says, because we're disappointed, because things aren't fair, I will block chesed, as if we're doing it to them. We're doing it to ourselves. When the Yetzer Hara says, if you resent, you may not have chesed, try to imagine, if I resent, this is when the chesed has to flow, because chesed might be the very thing that can help you unblock, and it might be the chesed that you bring to another person, where you have so much chesed that they pick up on it. They say, well, you're not mad at me, you don't resent me. You say, no, not at all. Yeah, you had a bad day, and when you come back to your senses, I'm here. So try to imagine of chesed as not something that you do absent of these other negative feelings, but something that actually can ameliorate these feelings, that can minimize these feelings. So, again, I don't want to set too high a bar in spiritual psychology, but I think cultivating a chesed state of consciousness is really an aspiration. When I studied the ethics, they call this the ethical personality, but this is way beyond ethical. I don't have a name for it, especially, but it's a cultivating a personality that contains the highest reaches of Jewish spiritual psychology. I still have a bit of a cold, so you'll give me a second here to regain my breathing. Uh, Now, when I think of din gavua, which is rationality, remember in my wisdom works scheme, the first level, virtue, rationality, and reasoning, I find I'm going back to this often. And part of what din gavura is having good theories. And we'll start, and a person will be complaining about somebody, and I say, "What's your theory of this person?" And they say, "Well, they don't always think about what they're doing, and they fly off the handle and so forth." And I said, "How long have you known this?" 20 years. I say, "And you're still surprised." So, and sometimes I'm talking to people who pride themselves in being very rational. And I say, you pride yourself in being rational, but you refuse to take the evidence of what you know about this person, create a theory, and let that theory drive your behavior. Right? So that might be the definition of irrationality. You ignore the facts, you ignore the theory, and every single thing is as if you have to think it through again. Um, Sometimes people have trouble relationships because they refuse to admit who another person is. Sometimes people are just not being good, but we want to make all kinds of excuses for them and say, yeah, but they're young. Yeah, but they had a bad childhood. Yeah, but somebody else is influencing them. Sometimes I say, well, so what? They're still acting badly. So if your theory is they can act badly because they have a reason, just want to think about that. I won't use good moral judgment that someone's acting badly because they have a reason. Is that morally reasonable? Or should we say that person is acting badly, whatever their reasons are? And therefore, I should not excuse what they do. And here's where we have to draw kind, clear, firm boundaries. We don't have to shut off chesed. We don't have to hate them, but we can say this person's acting badly, and if I ignore it, I might be enabling it. So here's a question: can we love somebody but draw boundaries? Can we love somebody but not enable them? So when I thought about the second sphera, Gevurah Din, I thought about this complex relationship that we have with rationality, boundary making, and so forth. So on one hand, if you have so much chesed you don't draw boundaries, that's a kind of a moral sickness. On the other hand, if you only have boundaries, you forget why we're here. We're here to love each other. Love your Rhea as yourself. And so between these two, there's sometimes I feel all we need to know about human living at the first pass is the relationship between chesed and gevurah. Going down to truth and beauty. Again, just going to my wisdom work schemes. When I think about the higher self, observer mind, I can actually see what's going on. Objective mind, verify whether it's actually objectively true. Rational mind, what's my theory? Truth mind, what's the true thing going on here? And I remember, I think I read it in M. Scott Peck, where he said, I didn't understand when I first read it. He said something like, neurosis comes from people not willing to accept the truth. Neurosis comes from people not willing to accept the truth. That was so radical for me. I just didn't believe him. I thought that was kind of a throwaway thought. But sometimes, if neurotically means we're not acting rationally, sometimes people are simply avoiding a difficult truth because to say the truth would make them too sad. It would make them feel despair, as if their world were falling apart. So they act and think as if that true thing does not exist. And I think people avoid the truth because the truth makes them too sad, and they'd have to give up a certain understanding of the world that is actually a misunderstanding of the world. And again, truth and beauty go together. I've read many sources in the past couple of weeks, almost in a serendipitous way, By the way, a note for the future: I'm reading deeply the German philosopher Friedrich Schleiermacher. I had to know his name when I was a graduate student, and I kept thinking, wait, what's the difference between Schleiermacher and Schopenhauer? Schleiermacher and Schopenhauer. So about every year, I read a thumbnail on here's Schleiermacher, here's Schopenhauer. So this year I thought to myself, okay, that's enough of that. I really want to know who these guys are. So first of all, Schopenhauer is a real downer. Don't read Schopenhauer. Read the thumbnails. Schleiermacher, on the other hand, is probably, in my mind, the most profound German thinker about religion. From him, all our favorites come: Rudolf Otto, the Holy, Paul Tillich, the God Beyond God. He is the father of liberal German Protestantism, and I think the most important philosopher for us to read today in thinking about religion. So I'm studying him, and there's some point where he has a book called On Religion. I think it's called Letters to its Cultured Despisers. Letters to its Cultured Despisers, which means his friends. He's part of the literary salons in Berlin, and his friends are super bohemian, super educated, German intellectual elite, and they just think religion is so not enlightenment. And he's on the border between the Enlightenment and Romanticism, which means the Enlightenment does not exhaust theory of a human being. We're just not disembodied intellect. There's that passion pushing through us, especially a passion to know the infinite. And in Germany, the passion to know the infinite was understood to be part of what art is. On the other side of art, of all art, is the divine, and something in the divine is drawing you toward art. Art, whatever art you love, it's irresistible. It's pulling you toward it. And when you truly, deeply immerse yourself into some art form, you're drawn to it because the divine is percolating there, and then the divine, as it were, reaches out to you and shapes you in return. So with art, your soul is drawn toward it, and your soul is shaped by it. So he says to his friends, religion is art. Religion is art. It's symbols, it's myths, it's sacred stories. These are art forms, and you're rejecting one of our greatest treasures. Our greatest cultural treasures is the art of myth and symbols. It's very eloquent. So I'm reading that now with my German student whom you've heard about, and I'd like to bring some of that into our studies after the counting of the Omer. And I also want to make sure to bring in textual sources so that you will remember these teachings with a Jewish textual source. So one thing about this is that religion cannot be reduced to dogma, because when you have dogma, it's like an intellectual packaging of religion, and say, well, this is what I believe. Christ is the Savior. God created the universe. I think I'm very deeply Jewish. I don't sit around all day thinking that God created the universe. I hardly ever think about that. What I do is I study Psalms, I look at my prayer book, I study Zohar, I study Talmud. I don't sit around thinking about, why do bad things happen to good people, and did God create the universe? I'm immersed in a textual tradition. And so I read a wonderful text this week that I'd like to share with you. The Hebrew says the following: L'cho esev v'esev yesh mazal barakia shemakeh oto v'omer gedal gedal. So the English is, esev v'esev can mean any kind of herbiage, but here we'll say weed. For every weed, there's a constellation in the sky that smacks it, makelto, like wakes it from its slumber and says, grow, grow. Now, this comes into English as every blade of grass has an angel. There is a way to say blade of grass in Hebrew, but esev v'esev is, it can include, wild grass, but kind of any kind of a certain herbiage. There's not an angel, but a constellation. This has a sense of astrology, that there's a constellation that's governing it. But unlike how people typically see astrology, that the astrology is predicting your life, this mazal berakia, this zodiac sign in the sky, is looking at that over which it has charge. and it's not doing its work. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. It says umakeoto. It hits it. He strikes it and says gadal, grow. Of course, when I when I read this, I thought to myself, spiritual psychology. We're just a bunch of weeds in the field. We don't know there's actually a constellation in the sky looking after us and guarding us, but we refuse to grow. And sometimes life just smacks us upside the head and says, Gadal, grow, grow. Uh, so if someone said to me, well, what do I believe? Well, I believe there's a constellation in the sky looking over me. It smacks me down and tells me to grow. That's what I believe, right? So mean, I don't believe in big things. I believe in small things. So I was reading Schleiermacher, and his saying, doctrine is sometimes the worst thing that can happen to religion. I found this very nice little artful phrase from, by the way, if you want to know where it's from Breshit Rabbah, Genesis Rabbah, chapter 10, number 6, if you want the source. I read this tiny little thing, and then I thought, it's true. It's true. Now, what do I mean by true? This is going to please Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins in the sense of true? They don't matter, because the truth of poetry is not doctrinal truth that you can say yay or nay. The truth in this little tiny little piece of midrash was, it spoke to me and it awakened me to believe something that I don't believe. Do I have a destiny? Is there a path I'm supposed to take? Well, it mentally means being a true and authentic human being, that's for sure. But the idea that there's a constellation overlooking me and says, you have a path to go on. There's a way you're supposed to live. And if you don't, I'm going to smack you, right? And I'll tell you to grow. Well, it was a very profound moment for me reading this tiny little poem. So where did I find the poem? An Israeli friend sent me a song on Spotify that the song is called Da, No, and the song is about this. No, no. That for every piece of, of herbiage in the field, there's a constellation. So I looked at this and I thought, I read that somewhere. And I went and looked it up. So because somebody sent me a song on Spotify, very nice song, by the way, with a quote from Midrash Rabbah, I went and looked up the Midrash Rabbah. I looked at the song. Maybe next week I'll bring both together because we have a little more time on the Omer. And this songwriter was able to take this Midrash and write what I thought was a truly beautiful, captivating, very simple song. If you have simple Hebrew, you can read this song with a really deep, charming, meditative kind of melody. And so I think for a half an hour of my life this week, my whole life came together. Hebrew, Midrash, spirituality, the whole thing just became one for just a moment. I wanted to share that with. So what do I mean by truth? The truth is there's a constellation overlooking at me and sometimes smacks me out of my slumber. That I believe. Did God create the universe? I don't know, but I definitely know there's a Mazal Barakia that's looking after me and wakes me up. As I thought about the Netzach this week, so why did I mention that? It's beautiful and it's true. This tiny little pericope from Midrash, it's beautiful and it's true. I thought about Netzach this week. A few weeks ago, I had a new person call me. The person has two friends whom I counseled years ago, and each friend said, within 3 weeks, my marriage changed. You got to call this guy. She said, well, he's a rabbi. This guy's not Jewish. He's a rabbi. I don't know. I mean, I do have a therapist. They said, look, just like we're not like, we don't get a percentage. We're not getting a cut. We just think he can help you. So, he said arguing with his wife, the whole deal, and I explained, he was a 4C guy, always angry, always criticizing, complaining, condemning, controlling, the whole deal. And he gave me the picture. And I said, are you willing to stop? Are you willing to stop? I said, well, what do you mean? She does this, she does this. She said, I get it. I've only heard it 1,000 times. So, yeah, sometimes it's the husband, sometimes it's the wife. I don't know who. My question to you is, I'm talking to you. Are you willing to stop with the harsh language, the criticizing, the unsolicited advice, the complaining, the over-the-top language, and engaging escalating conflict? I just want to know if you're willing to stop, because if you're willing to stop, I can help you. And he says, well, I don't know. So, you know me. I said, well, that's the wrong answer. I said, the right answer is yes, but I'm going to ask you to decide. Because if you decide, I'll be happy to work with you. But if you're not going to decide, go to places where people don't have to decide. Right? This thing is for people who decide. Now, you'll decide and you'll fail. You'll decide and your will fail you, but it won't because you didn't but it won't be because you didn't decide. So we talked a bit. I said, once you decide, we can marshal up the will and then marshal up the skills. So we talked a little bit, and I said, so have you decided? He says, yeah, I've decided. I said a little more emphatically. He says, yeah, I've decided. I've decided. I don't want to be that person. He says, I'm looking at myself. I'm always angry. I'm always criticizing. I'm always upset. I said, he says, yeah, I don't want to be this person. I want to become something else. I said, I can help you. I said, decide with will. I can help you with the skills. Well, things got, as almost all of you know, things got better in 2 weeks. Now the thing is, train every single day, right? So have a vision for what you want to become, decide with will, master the skills, and train every day. Now, I've been teaching this for 10 years now, and it's always fresh. It's always relevant. So that's the sphere of Netzach, which I'm seeing as the will, and part of the will is the power to decide. Now we go to Hod, which is beauty instantiated, which means beauty that has a moment. Okay, so I was kind of stunned today by because I mentioned to him something. We're studying Schleiermacher together, and I mentioned his that religion is beauty, religion is art. I want to share with you something that happened. So one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century was Hans Georg Gadamer, a great philosopher of language. If you're not in the world of hermeneutics and interpretation theory, you've never heard of him. If you have, he might be too obscure. But if you're really in the world of the language of philosophy, Hans-Georg Gadamer is one of the looming figures. Hans-Georg Gadamer and Jürgen Habermas are the two great German philosophers of the 20th century, two of my favorite philosophers. They're dense, but they're worth it. So he said to me, I just remembered something. I said, what'd you remember? And it turns out that he had a group of friends where they had a literary circle called End of the Century. So this was the end of the 1990s, and we met every week, to talk about the end of the century. Gadamer was aged; he was in his 90s, if I'm not mistaken, and my friend was in his I think at the time in his late 50s, range of people, and Gadamer's in this group, and he said they had a beautiful conversation. So it's interesting, as I mentioned, splendor, Hod, he went to a beautiful conversation. He said, Rabbi Finley, have you ever had those beautiful conversations where it feels like it was scripted, that it's like an opera? I said, yeah, I've been there enough times to know that suddenly you register, this is beautiful. Torah study is oftentimes that way. Like, it's beautiful. It's true and it's beautiful. So he said to me that Gadamer, who's an aged man, said, I'm too tired to take my car back to where I live. He said, can I sleep here tonight? my friend said, oh, of course you can stay here tonight. So my friend tucked Gadamer into his own bed, and Gadamer looks at him and says, I'm sorry if I tear up, he said, this has been such a beautiful evening. I'm happy to die tonight. So my friend says, well, uh, hey, please don't die. But if you died in my bed, I would be so honored. I can say Gadamer died in my bed, and they had a good laugh. But my friend was just so taken that it was as if the man had absorbed enough beauty in his life that he was ready to go. So he said, "Well, Gadamer did not die in my bed. He went on and lived a while longer." I said, "Well, maybe your bed revived him. I don't know." But when I mentioned beauty, that the conversation, the person says, I've had so much beauty, including this night. I'm full and I'm ready to go. I thought that was such an exquisite little midrash on the term Hod. We're moving from Hod into Yesod, beauty, splendor or beauty, or what I call instantiated beauty, from metaphysical beauty into instances of beauty, into the sphere of Yesod. Yesod means foundation, and you can see where I'm going with this. Yesod is like the foundation of our lives. And as I think about all this meditating, contemplating that I'm doing on the different sefirot, it comes down to, somehow I'm holding all of this. I'm creating a platform that all of this, the living through the sefirot, I'm building like like a foundation of a house so that all of it can rest here. And I want this to be, the house that I've lived in these past 6 weeks, to be the structure in which my consciousness finds its home. So this is, as I thought about, this is the foundation of my life. Now here's the thing, as we talked about earlier, these rooms are endless. The depth of these rooms are endless. The rooms we've gone through in the past week, Chesed, Gevurah Din, Tiferet Emet, Netzach, Hod, and coming up is Yesod. These are, rooms in an endless corridor that has no end, and each room has no end. So here's the last thing I want to say. In studying Schleiermacher, who's by the way, if you look at Schleiermacher, he is his parents were part of the Mährische or Moravian Protestants, who were actually Protestants before Luther. They're as it were, proto-Protestants, and they were mystics, and they had mystical communities. Their patron Zinzendorf, made sure that they were protected and could live. And there were some who came to North America, to the United States, and tried to create these Moravian, these Moravian communities here without much success. And I thought to myself, well, and by the way, they still exist. I mean, if you know somebody who knows somebody, you can probably visit one of these places. They're communes of people who are only interested in knowing God and loving each other. That's all they want to do. And then they make artifacts and they farm, but their focus is knowing God and loving each other, facilitated by their Protestantism. I think me, Rob, and I met two of them when we came here in December 2023. We heard German behind us, and we said, "Ah, sprechen Sie Deutsch?" Of course, we the sprechen Deutsch because they're German. And they told me about their community. It sounded exactly like a Moravian community, and they mentioned, we love God, we know God, we love each other, and that's what we want to do as well as make a living. And you could feel from these two young women just something special, some kind of a light about them. So Schleiermacher, who's descended from, and this was the religion of his home. It's not about doctrine. It's about loving God and loving each other. And then Christianity is the symbolic, mythical world in which you live, in which we can bring all of this alive. So that was his foundation. Again, it takes us to Rudolf Otto, Das Heilige, the Holy, Paul Tillich, the God beyond God. So I'm very much looking forward to reading. So the book I'm reading is called On Religion, Letters to Its Cultured Despisers, meaning his literary. It's ironic because he's writing, because his friends keep saying to him, write a book, write a book, write a book. He's like, okay, I'm going to write a book. And these super elite, highly cultured people, he's writing the book to them. So here's the connection. Who sponsored this literary salon in Berlin? A Jewish couple named Hertz. The wife, Henrietta Hertz, she outlived her husband, and she was corresponding with Schleiermacher as he was writing his book. So, who knows the connection that Henrietta, I think her name was Henrietta Hertz had on Schleiermacher as he was writing his book. Every Jew in those days was an educated Jew. And then whom did he marry? Well, one of the most famous German Jewish philosophers of the time was Moses Mendelssohn, brother of Felix Mendelssohn, who was a great composer. Moses Mendelssohn was a great Jewish philosopher. Moses Mendelssohn had a daughter, Dorothea, whom Schleiermacher married. So I tried to poke around and say, has anybody talked about the influence of Henrietta Hertz and Dorothea Schleiermacher? By the way, she had on him, and I just touched the surface, but I'm really interested in knowing if anybody's really thought about this, because Dorothea, who became Schleiermacher, was a published poet and wrote plays, and I'm just so anxious to take a look at all this. So coming up, I want us to get back to some texts, and I want to talk about his theories, but with a text supporting the theory, and go into this world of religion is art. The myths and symbols that like art draw us toward them, so through them we can experience the divine reaching through these myths and symbols to shape us. So this has been a very productive period for me. I hope for you, and I'm looking for what comes next. All right, that's my talk for tonight. I hope you've enjoyed some part of this. Always remember that this will be up on YouTube in several days, and go to our YouTube page. By the way, we're getting ready to start think about next year. We want to give you a financial report from this past year. We needed a time off from doing administrative things, and tell you what we're doing and what it costs and how you can help us pay for it. But that's going to come up in May, June. So one thing is, getting things up on YouTube, the thing that people love, and how you can even make that better. We have great plans to make everything better. There's so much potential, and you're going to be a essential part of that.